Okay, with congestive heart failure is going to result in a decrease of cardiac output. That means that less blood is going to be pumped out of the heart each minute. It's a progressively worsening disease. Which means that it doesn't occur fast, but it's going to take baby steps and get worse and worse. And what happens in the end is blood circulation is not adequate for the tissues. Okay, there are basically 4 steps that you kind of look at with congestive heart failure. The first one we look at is coronary atherosclerosis. Coronary atherosclerosis is defined as the clogging of the arteries. Okay, if we're going to draw an artery here, let's say this is an artery that's normal, and here we're going to put plaque buildup along the wall of the artery. You can see that less blood would be able to pass through the lumen of the blood vessel, and that's going to clog the arteries so that it results in a decreased amount of blood. Flowing through the blood vessel. Because we're looking at coronary atherosclerosis specifically in number 1, we're looking at the coronary blood vessels. What are the coronary blood vessels? The coronary blood vessels include the right coronary artery, the left coronary artery, the circumflex artery, and the anterior and posterior interventricular arteries. Okay, let's look at number 2. Number 2 is persistent high blood pressure. Remember that the blood pressure is going to measures the force of the left ventricle. I should say, measures the force the left ventricle must produce. To open the aortic semilunar valve. So let's look at, here's our ventricle here. This is both ventricles. And we're going to have this right here be our aorta. This would be the semilunar valve. Okay, the left ventricle here is going to have to pump the blood or contract, and so that it will increase the force enough to open up the semilunar valves. And the semilunar valves will allow the blood to pass from the ventricle into the aorta. Whenever you have a blood pressure of a normal blood pressure, let's say 110/75, the pressure in the left ventricle, the highest pressure is 110, while the lowest pressure occurs while the ventricle is relaxed, and that pressure is going to be about 75. If we increase this blood pressure to 220/110, you can see that the left ventricle is going to have to contract with double the amount of force to be able to open up the semilunar valves, which is going to put a large stress on the left ventricle. So that is why high blood pressure is bad on the heart. Persistent high blood pressure does not allow for the heart to relax and recover and grow stronger. So eventually, the persistent high blood pressure is going to result in a weakened heart. The third step of congestive heart failure is multiple myocardial infarctions. A A myocardial infarction is also known as an MI, and commonly it's called a heart attack. A heart attack is going to result in dead cardiac muscle tissue. So here is your heart. Remember, it has 4 chambers. I don't know what happened to the pen. Okay, so it has 4 chambers. And we're going to say that this person has several heart attacks, and we're going to put our damaged areas here with these little pins. And you can see that every time you have a little dot, it's only going to represent 1%, 0.5% of the cells of the heart. But you can see after multiple myocardial infarctions, all of those small areas of damage are going to add up. And eventually what that's going to do is cause the heart not to be able to pump the blood out. Dead cells do not contract. And so you have dead cells that are not working, so you have less of your heart working. Okay, number 4. Number 4 is cardiomyopathy. Pathy means disease. Myo means muscle. Cardio means heart. So this is going to be a disease of the heart muscle. In cardiomyopathy, the cells are going to be weakened. The myocardial cells will be weakened. And the result of that is going to be the ventricles stretch, but they do not recoil. So what happens to the ventricles? The ventricles, we learned earlier with Starling's law that when the ventricles contract, when the ventricles stretch, they accommodate more blood and they recoil with a greater force. With cardiomyopathy, the ventricles stretch and they're going to stretch and they accommodate more blood, but they're not going to recoil with a greater force. So this is going to lead to the heart being enlarged heart. The reason that the heart is enlarged is because blood is backing up into the heart. Okay, let's say that this occurs on the right side of the heart. This is the right ventricle. We're going to say that the right ventricle is weak and it's not going to be able to pump all the blood out. So the blood's going to pool in the right ventricle. Then it's going to pool in the right atrium. It's going to begin to pool in your inferior vena cavas and in your large veins. Whenever the blood gets to the capillaries are going to back up with blood. That's going to increase the pressure in the capillaries, so you will have systemic edema. Okay, we turn this around. Let me just switch colors real fast. And we'll talk about the left side of the heart becoming weaker. If the left ventricle weakens, this means that the blood backs up in the left ventricle because the blood cannot be pumped out into the aorta. Eventually, it's going to back up into the left atrium. The left atrium will not be able to receive all of the blood from the pulmonary veins. The blood will back up into the pulmonary capillaries. And the pulmonary capillaries will then have a higher pressure, and that's going to lead to pulmonary edema.